All right. So get ready because today we are going deep into the world of cellular respiration.
Yeah.
We're taking a look at, those bio-class notes that you've all shared with us,
Hmm.
and we are breaking down how your body turns food into energy.
Right.
And this is happening in every single one of your cells right now.
It
It's
is
pretty amazing.
really incredible when you think about, how it all ties back to the food that we eat. I
Okay.
mean, think about it. Plants use sunlight to make glucose
Right.
through photosynthesis.
Right.
Then we eat those plants or animals that ate plants,
Yeah.
and our cells essentially reverse the process.
So you're saying like the energy from the sun ends up like powering our bodies?
Basically, yes.
Whoa.
Cellular respiration uses glucose and oxygen to produce energy
Okay.
and releases carbon dioxide and water as byproducts.
Interesting.
So it's really this beautifully balanced cycle.
That's kind of wild. I'm looking at my lunch in a whole new way now. But okay, let's get down to like the nitty gritty. How does our body actually turn glucose into energy we can use?
Yeah, so the key is a molecule called ATP adenosine triphosphate.
Okay.
You can think of it kind of like the cellular equivalent of cash.
Interesting. So what are our cells buying with this ATP currency?
They're everything.
Yeah.
Muscle contractions, nerve impulses, building new molecules,
Hmm.
transporting things across cell membranes, pretty much any process that requires energy.
Got it.
And the way that ATP works is fascinating.
Okay.
It's like a rechargeable battery.
Oh.
So when a phosphate group is broken off,
Yeah.
energy is released,
Right.
and to store energy, that phosphate group is reattached.
Uh-huh.
And that's what we call phosphorylation.
Okay, that makes sense. So cellular respiration is the whole process of breaking down glucose to make this ATP cash.
Exactly.
Right.
And it can happen with or without oxygen.
Okay.
Aerobic respiration with oxygen is the most efficient way to generate ATP.
Right.
But when oxygen is limited, cells can switch to anaerobic respiration.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's not as
Mhm.
efficient.
Right.
But it keeps things running in a pinch.
Like a backup.
Yeah.
Okay, so that makes you realize how important breathing is.
Yeah, for sure.
But this energy conversion seems pretty complex.
It is.
How does it actually work?
Well, one crucial aspect is something called R-redox reactions.
Okay.
It's short for reduction oxidation.
Right.
Sounds complicated, but it's basically the transfer of electrons between molecules.
Okay.
And here's the key. This transfer releases energy that the cell can then use.
So it's not just like moving electrons around, it's about like harnessing the energy from that movement.
Precisely.
Cool.
And two really important players in this electron shuffle are NAD plus and FAD.
Okay.
They act like little shuttles,
Mm-hmm.
picking up hydrogen atoms which carry electrons
Right.
and transporting them to the electron transport chain.
Okay.
That's where the bulk of the ATP is made.
Got it. Okay, so we've got glucose.
Yeah.
ATP is our energy currency.
Uh-huh.
Electrons being shuffled around in redox reactions. And these NAD plus and FAD shuttles. Right.
But how does the actual breakdown of glucose begin?
The first step is called glycolysis,
Okay,
which literally means sugar splitting.
got it.
It happens in the cytoplasm of the cell.
Okay.
And here's what's amazing. It doesn't need oxygen.
So whether we're breathing deeply or holding our breath,
Hmm.
our cells are constantly breaking down glucose through glycolysis.
Exactly.
Wow.
It's the first step in both aerobic and anaerobic respiration.
Okay.
So you can think of it as kind of a universal starting point for generating energy.
Okay, let's break down glycolysis.
Okay.
What happens to the glucose molecule?
So first the cell invests 2 ATP molecules to energize the glucose,
Okay.
like giving it a little kickstart.
Okay.
Then the 6-carbon glucose molecule is split in half,
Uh-huh.
forming 2 3-carbon molecules, each carrying a phosphate group.
So far, it sounds more like we're spending energy than making it.
Right.
When do we start seeing a return on that investment?
That's a great question, and that's where it gets really interesting. So we left off with these like 2 3-carbon molecules, each with a phosphate group.
Right.
What happens next?
So each of those molecules gets 2 more phosphate groups from the cytoplasm.
Okay.
And during this process, we also see those NAD plus shuttles grabbing hydrogen atoms and becoming NADH, which will be important later on.
Got it. So we're starting to load up those energy shuttles.
Exactly.
But what about those phosphate groups? Where do they go?
That's the payoff.
Okay.
Each 3-carbon molecule, now loaded up with phosphate groups, transfers those phosphates to ADP molecules,
Okay.
forming ATP.
Right. So basically we're making ATP.
Yeah, remember we invested 2 ATP at the beginning, so now we're starting to generate some energy.
Okay. So how much ATP are we talking about at this point?
So each 3-carbon molecule produces 2 ATP.
Mm-hmm.
And since we have 2 of them,
Right.
That's a total of 4 ATP produced.
Okay.
Subtract the 2 ATP we used initially.
Right.
And we have a net gain of 2 ATP from glycolysis.
Okay. Not a huge windfall, but hey, it's a start.
Yeah, exactly.
So what happens to those 3 carbon molecules now?
They transform into a molecule called pyruvate.
Okay.
Now, here's where the pathway diverges.
Yeah.
If oxygen is present,
Yeah.
the pyruvate molecules head to the mitochondria for aerobic respiration.
Okay.
That's where the real energy bonanza happens.
Daughter.
But if oxygen is scarce,
Mm-hmm.
the cell relies on anaerobic respiration, which is much less efficient.
So 2 different paths depending on if there's oxygen or not.
Exactly.
Okay, let's follow those pyruvate molecules on the aerobic path.
Okay.
What happens when they reach the mitochondria?
So the mitochondria are fascinating.
Yeah.
They have this double membrane structure,
Mm-hmm.
and the inner membrane is where a lot of the action takes place.
Right.
It's often called the powerhouse of the cell,
Okay.
and for good reason.
So the pyruvate enters this powerhouse.
Yeah.
Then what?
First, it goes through what we call a transition reaction.
Okay.
Basically, each pyruvate molecule loses a carbon atom as carbon dioxide,
Mhm.
and the remaining 2 carbons combine with a molecule called coenzyme A
Okay.
to form acetyl-CoA.
Acetyl-CoA. Got it.
Got it.
Okay, so we've lost a carbon and formed acetyl-CoA. Anything else happening during this transition?
Yes. For each pyruvate, another NAD plus molecule picks up a hydrogen atom, becoming NADH.
Oh, so we're generating more of those energy shuttles.
Exactly.
Okay, those NADH molecules seem pretty busy.
They are.
So where does acetyl-CoA go next?
It enters the Krebs cycle, also known as the citric acid cycle.
Right, the Krebs cycle.
This cycle is a series of reactions that occur in the mitochondrial matrix.
Okay.
That's the space inside the inner membrane.
Ah, the Krebs cycle. I remember learning about this, but it was like kind of a whirlwind of molecules.
Yeah, it can be a little confusing.
Can you give us like the highlight reel?
Absolutely. So
Okay.
each acetyl-CoA molecule combines with a 4-carbon molecule,
Mm-hmm.
and they go through a series of steps,
Right.
ultimately releasing 2 carbon dioxide molecules.
So the carbon atoms from the original glucose are eventually released as carbon dioxide.
That's right.
Which we breathe out. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is.
But what about the energy production? What else is happening in the Krebs cycle?
The Krebs cycle is all about generating those energy shuttles.
Okay.
So for each acetyl-CoA molecule that enters the cycle,
Yeah.
we get 3 NADH molecules
Mm-hmm.
and 1 AVDH2 molecule.
Okay.
Plus, we also get 1 ATP molecule directly.
Wait, I thought the electron transport chain was the big ATP producer.
It is.
Okay.
But the Krebs cycle plays a crucial role
Right.
by loading up those NADH and FADH2 shuttles,
Yeah.
which then deliver their cargo of electrons to the electron transport chain.
Okay, starting to see the bigger picture here.
Yeah.
So after the Krebs cycle, we've got carbon dioxide being released, a
Right.
little bit of ATP produced directly,
Uh-huh.
and these energy-packed NADH and FADH2 molecules.
Yep.
What happens next?
They head to the inner mitochondrial membrane where the electron transport chain is located.
Okay.
This is where the real magic happens.
The grand finale. I'm ready for this ATP payoff. What goes on in the electron transport chain?
It's like a relay race of energy transfer.
Okay.
So the NADH and FADH2 molecules
Mm.
arrive at this chain of protein complexes,
Mm.
and they release their electrons.
So those hydrogen atoms they've been carrying are finally handing off their electrons.
Yeah.
What happens to those electrons?
They get passed from one protein complex to the next like a bucket brigade.
Okay.
And here's the key. As these electrons move down the chain, they release energy.
Got it.
And this energy is used to pump protons,
Proton.
hydrogen ions, across the inner mitochondrial membrane.
Why are we pumping protons? What's the point of that? So we've got all these protons being pumped across the membrane. What's the purpose of this proton buildup?
It creates what we call a proton gradient,
Okay.
kind of like a dam.
Right.
You have a high concentration of protons on one side of the membrane
Yeah.
and a low concentration on the other.
Okay.
And just like water behind a dam, these protons store potential energy.
I'm starting to see where this is going. So how do we get from this proton dam to ATP?
This is where it gets really amazing.
Okay.
Those protons want to flow back down their concentration gradient
Mm-hmm.
from high concentration to low concentration.
Right.
And they do this by passing through a special protein complex called ATP synthase.
What does ATP synthase do?
It acts like a turbine,
Okay.
using the flow of protons to spin and generate ATP from ADP and phosphate.
So it's like a hydroelectric dam generating electricity.
Exactly.
But instead of electricity, we get ATP.
That's right, the energy currency of our cells.
Wow, that's incredible. So the energy released from those electrons moving down the chain is used to pump protons, creating a gradient that powers ATP synthase.
Precisely.
What a beautifully designed system.
It is.
But you mentioned oxygen earlier. What's its role in all of this?
Oxygen is the final electron acceptor in the electron transport chain.
Okay.
Without oxygen waiting at the end of the chain,
Yeah.
those electrons would have nowhere to go.
Right.
The chain would back up, and ATP production would grind to a halt.
So that's why we need to breathe.
Exactly.
Oxygen keeps the electron transport chain flowing, allowing for continuous ATP production.
That's right.
What happens to the oxygen after it accepts those electrons?
It combines with hydrogen ions to form water.
So essentially, we're breathing in oxygen, using it to power our cellular energy factories, and then breathing out water as a byproduct.
Basically.
Mind-blowing. But what happens when our cells don't have enough oxygen? You mentioned anaerobic respiration earlier. How does that work?
So when oxygen is scarce,
Like when you're working out really hard.
exactly, like during intense exercise,
Mhm.
some of our cells can switch to anaerobic respiration,
Okay.
also known as fermentation.
Right.
It's not as efficient as aerobic respiration,
Right.
but it allows cells to generate a small amount of ATP without oxygen.
So it's like a backup generator when the main power goes out.
A perfect analogy.
Okay. There are two main types of fermentation, right? Lactic acid fermentation and alcoholic fermentation. I've heard of lactic acid. Isn't that what makes our muscles sore after a workout?
That's right.
Uh-huh.
In lactic acid fermentation,
Yeah.
NADH,
Yeah.
those energy shuttles,
Right.
donate their electrons to pyruvate,
Mm-hmm.
the molecule we talked about earlier.
Right.
This regenerates NAD+, which is essential for glycolysis to continue,
Okay.
and it produces lactic acid as a byproduct.
So it allows glycolysis to keep churning out a little bit of ATP even when oxygen is limited,
Exactly.
but it comes at the cost of muscle soreness.
Yeah, you could say that.
Interesting trade-off. What about alcoholic fermentation?
Alcoholic fermentation is not something our cells do,
Okay.
but it's the process used by yeast and some other microorganisms.
Right.
Instead of producing lactic acid, they produce ethanol.
Okay.
That's the alcohol in beer and wine,
Oh, cool.
and carbon dioxide, which is why bread dough rises.
Uh-huh. So that's how those tiny yeast cells power our bread and beer. We've covered a lot of ground today, from photosynthesis to the intricate steps of cellular respiration, both with and without oxygen. It's amazing to think that all of this is happening inside us right now,
I know, it's incredible.
constantly converting the food we eat into the energy that keeps us alive.
It's a remarkable process.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it kind of makes you wonder, like, what can we do to support this vital process?
Yeah, what can we do?
What lifestyle choices or dietary habits can we adopt to keep our cellular energy factories running smoothly? That's something for all of us to think about.
Absolutely. The more we understand about how our bodies work, the better equipped we are to make choices that support our health and well-being.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive into cellular respiration. We hope you've enjoyed this journey into the microscopic world of energy production. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.